guys, tonight we're not venturing into the distant battlefields of antiquity or the grand courts of forgotten kings. Instead, we're journeying to a small, devout, and deeply troubled Puritan village in Colonial, Massachusetts. A place where fear, superstition, and insidious accusations would ignite one of the darkest chapters in early American history. We are stepping into the chilling, paranoia-gripped world of Salem in 1692. And tonight, you are the accused. We're going to explore why it truly, profoundly sucked to be accused of witchcraft in Salem, a time when spectral evidence condemned the innocent, coerced confessions sealed fates, and escape from the tightening noose of hysteria was virtually impossible. Tonight's reality check. You probably wouldn't survive the first formal accusation, let alone the relentless psychological and societal pressure that followed. The sheer, unyielding certainty of your accusers, fueled by a terrifying blend of religious fervor and inexplicable afflictions, would crush your spirit long before any gallows were erected. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, drop a line in the comments to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is your corner of the world. It's always a privilege to share these historical deep dives with you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's unsettling journey together. It begins subtly, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a chill in the air that has nothing to do with the harsh New England weather. You are a resident of Salem Village or perhaps the nearby Salem town, a God-fearing Puritan, your life governed by hard work, strict religious observance, and the ever-present belief in the reality of Satan and his earthly agents, witches. For months, perhaps even a year, the community has been unsettled. There are disputes over land, rivalries between families, anxieties about Indian wars on the frontier, and a general sense of unease that the devil might be actively working to undermine this fragile city upon a hill. Then the young daughter and niece of the village minister, Reverend Samuel Parris, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, along with other young women in the community, begin to exhibit strange, disturbing behaviors. Fits, convulsions, contortions, uttering strange sounds, and complaining of being pinched, pricked, and tormented by unseen forces. The initial afflictions of a small group of young women in Salem Village in early 1692, attributed by local doctors after ruling out physical causes to witchcraft, were the spark that ignited the wider Salem witch hunt. At first, these events are a source of local curiosity, concern, and prayer. But as the girls' afflictions continue, and as they begin to name names, often starting with marginalized women like Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved woman from the Caribbean, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly bedridden woman known for disputes over property. A darker mood settles over the community. You hear the whispers. You see the furtive glances. People start to look at their neighbors with a new suspicion. Who among them could be secretly consorting with the devil? Who is sending their spectral shapes to torment these innocent children? The sermons in the meeting house become more fiery, more focused on the presence of evil in their midst. You try to go about your daily life, tending your farm, mending your tools, attending church services. But the air is thick with an unspoken fear. Historians have proposed numerous theories to explain the initial afflictions of the girls, ranging from genuine psychological distress perhaps conversion disorder or ergot poisoning from contaminated rye, though the latter is largely discredited now, to outright fraud or attention-seeking behavior, or a complex interplay of social, religious, and psychological factors within the stressed Puritan community. Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. A growing paranoia. You might notice a neighbor who once greeted you warmly now averts their gaze, or a casual remark you made weeks ago is suddenly being repeated with a sinister new interpretation. You try to be more devout, more circumspect in your words and actions, hoping to avoid any hint of suspicion. But in Salem in 1692, innocence is a fragile shield against a fear that is rapidly consuming all reason. And you, a man or woman, for accusations knew no gender entirely, though women were disproportionately targeted, of good standing, perhaps with a small farm, a family, a reputation for piety, begin to feel a cold dread. The whispers are getting closer. The circle of accusation is widening, and you can't shake the feeling that someone, someday soon, might utter your name. A quirky, or rather, terrifyingly common feature of early New England witchcraft beliefs was the idea that witches often targeted children, or that their malevolence could cause physical illness and misfortune within the community. This made the afflicted girls particularly potent accusers, their seemingly inexplicable torments seen as direct evidence of demonic assault. You, living in this pressure cooker of fear and suspicion, pray that your own children remain unaffected, and that your own name remains unspoken in the dangerous game of accusation that is just beginning to unfold. The whispers and furtive glances that have been unsettling your days soon coalesce into something far more terrifying. A direct accusation. It might happen during one of the increasingly frequent examinations of other accused individuals, or perhaps one of the afflicted girls simply collapses in a fit while you are nearby, or even just mentioned in conversation. Suddenly, a finger is pointed. Your name is cried out. The pattern of accusations in Salem often involved the afflicted girls naming individuals they claimed were tormenting them in spectral form, leading to the arrest and examination of the accused, a process that quickly escalated from a few initial suspects to dozens and eventually hundreds of people from Salem and surrounding towns. Imagine the scene. You are in the crowded Salem Village Meeting House, observing the examination of someone already accused. The atmosphere is thick with tension, a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and fervent religious zeal. One of the young accusers, perhaps Abigail Williams or Ann Putnam Jr., two of the most prominent, suddenly contorts, screams, and points directly at you. There he is. Goodman, your name. He is pinching me. His spirit is upon me, choking me. Other afflicted girls might join in, writhing on the floor, claiming to see your spectral shape tormenting them, perhaps accompanied by a yellow bird, a common witch's familiar in Puritan folklore, or the shadowy figure of the devil himself. The magistrates, stern-faced men like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, turn their gaze upon you. The crowd murmurs, a wave of shock and suspicion rippling through the room. Your denials, your protestations of innocence, are drowned out by the renewed screams and convulsions of your accusers. In this moment, your world shatters. It doesn't matter that you are a respected member of the community, a devout churchgoer, a hard-working farmer or craftsman. It doesn't matter that you have no history of witchcraft, no animosity towards these girls. Their accusation in the supercharged atmosphere of Salem carries the weight of irrefutable truth for many. the spectral evidence. Their claim to see your spirit, or specter, afflicting them while your physical body is elsewhere, is considered valid, a key and damning feature of the Salem trials. The acceptance of spectral evidence by the Salem magistrates, despite its inherent unverifiability and warnings against its use from some more cautious ministers outside Salem, was a crucial factor that allowed the witch hunt to escalate so dramatically and unjustly. You are stunned, disbelieving. This must be a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. But there is no room for doubt in the eyes of the magistrates or the AI-driven. The girl's performance of torment is too convincing, too visceral. Their pain, whether real or feigned, is attributed to your malevolent influence. Historians continue to debate the motivations of the accusers. Were they truly believing themselves to be afflicted? Were they caught up in a form of mass hysteria? Were they manipulated by adults? Or were they consciously lying for reasons of personal vendetta, power, or attention? The answer is likely complex and varied from individual to individual. A quirky, or rather chillingly effective tactic used by the afflicted girls was to mimic the movements or words of the accused during examinations. If you shifted your weight, they might cry out that your specter was pushing them. If you bit your lip in anxiety, they might scream that you were biting them with your spectral teeth. This evidence further convinced the credulous onlookers of your guilt. For you, standing there, a finger pointed, your name reviled. The nightmare has just begun. The carefully constructed order of your Puritan life has been ripped apart by a child's scream and a pointing finger. And there is, it seems, no way to prove your innocence against a ghost. The public accusation is swift, brutal, and damning. Before you can fully comprehend the enormity of what has happened, the machinery of Puritan justice, fueled by fear and religious certainty, grinds into motion. Following a formal complaint, an accusation of witchcraft, typically made by the afflicted individuals or their families, a warrant would be issued for your arrest by the local magistrates, and you would be taken into custody, often with little ceremony and much public consternation. Your life irrevocably altered in a matter of hours. There is no presumption of innocence here, only a deepening suspicion of guilt. Imagine it's late at night, or perhaps in the stark light of early morning. There's a heavy banging on your door. Your heart lurches. You know, with a sickening certainty, who it is and why they've come. The local constable, perhaps accompanied by other officials or even a small self-righteous posse of your neighbors, stands on your threshold. A warrant clutched in his hand. He reads the charges. You, your name, are accused of witchcraft, of covenanting with the devil, of afflicting by supernatural means the bodies of names of the afflicted girls. Your family, your wife, your children, look on in disbelief and terror. Your wife might protest, vouch for your piety, your good character. Your children might weep, but it is no use. The warrant is legal, the accusation made. You are under arrest. You are not gently escorted. You are seized, perhaps roughly, your arms bound. There is no Miranda warning, no right to an attorney in the modern sense. You are simply taken, torn from your home, your livelihood, your life as you knew it. As you are led away, you see the faces of your neighbors peeking from behind their curtains, some with fear, some with a morbid curiosity, perhaps some with a grim satisfaction. if you were someone they held a grudge against. The social fabric of the community, once a source of support, now feels like a tightening net. Your reputation, carefully built over years of hard work and devout observance, is shattered in an instant. You are no longer Goodman. Your name, respected citizen. You are a suspected witch, an agent of Satan. The journey to the place of confinement, perhaps the local tavern's cellar, a makeshift jail, or the already overcrowded Salem jail itself, is a walk of shame. People might point, whisper, or even shout curses as you pass. The officials holding you might treat you with contempt, already convinced of your guilt. The speed and public nature of these arrests were part of the escalating hysteria, each new accusation and apprehension reinforcing the community's belief that they were under demonic assault and that witches were rampant in their midst. A quirky, or rather terrifyingly absurd, detail of some arrests was that if the afflicted girls were present, they might go into fresh convulsions or claim to be tormented by your mere presence, further proving your guilt in the eyes of the onlookers and officials. You, a man of reason, a man of faith, find yourself trapped in a nightmare logic where your very existence seems to provoke demonic manifestations in others. As the heavy door of the jail or holding cell slams shut behind you, plunging you into a new, more literal darkness, you are overwhelmed by a sense of disbelief, injustice, and a profound, terrifying uncertainty about what horrors still await. Your world has not just been turned upside down, it has been ripped apart at the seams. Once arrested and confined, your ordeal enters a new phase, the preliminary examination before the local magistrates. This is not a trial by jury in the modern sense, with defense attorneys and rules of evidence. The Salem witchcraft examinations, typically conducted by magistrates like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, were more like aggressive interrogations held in public, often in the crowded meeting house or a local tavern, where the accused were directly confronted by their accusers and subjected to leading questions designed to elicit a confession or further evidence of their guilt. The presumption of guilt was palpable. Imagine being brought, perhaps in chains, before the examining magistrates. They sit at a table, stern-faced, their Bibles open, their expressions a mixture of grave concern and unyielding certainty. The room is packed with villagers, their faces a sea of fear, suspicion, and morbid fascination. Your accusers, the afflicted girls, are also present, often seated prominently. The examination begins. The magistrate addresses you, perhaps in a thunderous voice. Goodman, your name. You are brought before us on suspicion of witchcraft. What say you to these charges? Your denials, however firm, however eloquent, are often met with skepticism or outright disbelief. If you are innocent, the magistrate might retort, then how do you explain the torments of these poor, afflicted children? The questions are relentless, often circular and designed to trap you. Have you covenanted with the devil? Have you signed his book? What imps or familiars do you employ to do your evil work? Why do you hurt these children? Every word you say, every gesture you make is scrutinized, interpreted through the lens of presumed guilt. If you look down, you are ashamed. If you look directly at your accusers, you are attempting to bewitch them further. If you remain silent, it is a sign of obstinacy and guilt. If you weep, your frontiers are those of a cunning deceiver. There is no right answer, no way to win. Legal historians and scholars of the Salem trials have meticulously documented the nature of these examinations, highlighting the lack of due process, the aggressive questioning, and the inherent bias against the accused. The afflicted girls play a crucial role in these proceedings. As you speak, or even just look in their direction, they might erupt into fits, convulsions, and screams, claiming that your specter is tormenting them at that very moment. They might contort their bodies into unnatural positions, cry out that they are being pinched, bitten, or choked by your invisible hand. This spectral evidence, as we've discussed, is often taken as undeniable proof of your guilt. The magistrates might even ask the girls to identify marks on your body where your specter supposedly re-entered after its demonic errands. The performative aspect of the afflicted girls' testimonies, whether consciously enacted or the result of genuine psychological distress or mass hysteria, was incredibly powerful in swaying public opinion and convincing the authorities of the accused's guilt. A quirky, or rather tragically absurd, feature of these examinations was the touch test. If an afflicted person was in the throes of a fit, the accused might be ordered to touch them. If the fit then ceased, it was taken as proof that the accused was indeed the witch responsible. The idea being that the malevolent influence returned to the witch's body upon contact. You, caught in this web of superstition and circular reasoning, realize with dawning horror that your fate is being decided not by facts or logic, but by the screams and convulsions of a group of young women and the unshakable conviction of men who believe they are fighting a literal war against Satan. Your words are meaningless, your innocence irrelevant. The interrogation grinds on, each question another turn of the screw. The most damning and indeed the most defining feature of your examination and any subsequent trial in Salem is the pervasive and largely irrefutable power of spectral evidence. This was the assertion by the accusers, primarily the afflicted girls, that they could see the specter or spirit shape of the accused tormenting them, or appearing at witch gatherings, Sabbaths, even while the accused person's physical body was demonstrably elsewhere. For you, the accused, this form of evidence is a waking nightmare, a charge against which there is virtually no defense, as only the accuser can see your spectral malevolence. Imagine the scene in the crowded meeting house. You stand before the magistrates, steadfastly maintaining your innocence. But then, one of the afflicted girls cries out, "I see Goodman, your name's specter now," standing by the magistrate's elbow, urging him to disbelieve me. Or another might scream, "His spirit is pinching me, here on my arm," and then display a red mark or a scratch, which could have been self-inflicted, or simply an ordinary blemish interpreted through the lens of witchcraft. The magistrates and much of the assembled crowd take these spectral sightings as gospel truth. How can you refute what someone else claims to see in the spirit world? How can you prove that your specter was innocently at home? Or indeed, that you don't even possess the ability to project such a thing? It is an impossible defense. The ministers and magistrates of Salem, for the most part, accepted spectral evidence as valid, believing that the devil could not assume the shape of an innocent person to afflict others without that person's consent, i.e., without them having made a pact with him. This theological and legal interpretation, though controversial even at the time among some more skeptical Boston area ministers, was crucial in allowing the accusations to proliferate. If an afflicted person said they saw your specter, it was taken as strong, if not conclusive, proof that you were in league with the devil. The debate over the admissibility and reliability of spectral evidence was a central legal and theological issue during the Salem witch trials, and its eventual rejection by the authorities was a key factor in bringing the hysteria to an end. But for those accused while it was still accepted, it was a death knell. You might try to reason with the magistrates. You might call upon your reputation for piety, your years of good Christian living. You might have witnesses testify to your whereabouts at the time of your alleged spectral assaults. But none of it matters against the vivid, dramatic, and often seemingly incontrovertible testimony of the afflicted. They are having fits. They are screaming in agony. They are pointing at you, or your invisible specter. Who is a magistrate to disbelieve these innocent sufferers, especially when they are confirming his deepest fears about the devil's work in Salem? The psychological power of the afflicted girl's performances, combined with the prevailing Puritan belief in an active interventionist Satan and the reality of witchcraft, created a perfect storm where spectral claims were readily accepted. A quirky, or rather, deeply insidious aspect of spectral evidence was its unfalsifiability. There was no objective test, no physical proof you could offer to counter it. It existed only in the perception or assertion of your accusers. You, a man of the 17th century, even with its own superstitions, might still recognize the profound injustice of being condemned by ghosts only others can see. Your life hangs on the visions or the words of a few young women, and in the courtroom of Salem, their spectral testimonies are as solid as iron chains. It's a terrifying realization. You are being hunted not for what you have done, but for what your invisible doppelganger is accused of doing, in a world beyond your senses and your control. As your examination grinds on, or perhaps during the long, terrifying days and nights of your imprisonment, you are subjected to another, more insidious form of pressure. The relentless efforts by magistrates, ministers, and even sometimes your own distraught family members to extract a confession. In the Puritan worldview of Salem, a confession of witchcraft was seen not only as proof of guilt, but also as a crucial step towards repentance and the potential salvation of the accused's soul. And pragmatically, it often meant a stay of execution, as the authorities were more interested in identifying other witches than in immediately hanging those who confessed and implicated others. This created a terrible, almost irresistible pressure to admit to crimes you did not commit, simply to save your life, or to end the torment of interrogation and imprisonment. Imagine the scene. You are weak from lack of food and sleep, terrified by the spectral accusations, and bewildered by the legal nightmare you are trapped in. A stern-faced magistrate, or perhaps the local minister, Reverend Paris or Reverend Noise, leans in close, his voice a mixture of admonition and feigned concern. "Goodman, your name," he might say. "The evidence against you is strong. These afflicted children suffer grievously because of your compact with the devil. Will you not unburden your soul, confess your sins, renounce Satan, and name those who have joined you in this evil compact? Only then can you hope for God's mercy, and perhaps the mercy of this court. The implication is clear. Confess, and you might live, albeit as a reviled, imprisoned witch who has betrayed others. Remain defiant in your innocence, and you will surely hang." This pressure is not just verbal. It can be accompanied by leading questions, by psychological manipulation, by sleep deprivation, during lengthy interrogations. They might tell you that others have already confessed and named you. They might remind you of your duty to your family, suggesting that a confession could spare them further hardship or suspicion. Your own family members, terrified for your life, and perhaps even beginning to doubt your innocence in the face of such overwhelming evidence and community condemnation, might plead with you to confess, believing it is your only hope. The psychological torment of being isolated, universally condemned, and faced with the stark choice between a false confession and likely implicating others, and certain death by hanging was immense. And it is understandable why some, though not all, of the accused eventually broke under the pressure. The authorities in Salem were particularly keen on getting confessions, because according to their beliefs, a witch's confession validated the entire process, and crucially, could lead to the identification of other witches in the supposed demonic conspiracy. Those who confessed were often spared immediate execution, but they were then expected to provide names, to become witnesses against their former accomplices. This created a horrifying chain reaction, where one coerced confession could lead to dozens more accusations, fueling the ever-widening circle of hysteria. Historians of the Salem trials highlight the instrumental role of coerced confessions in perpetuating and expanding the witch hunt, as confessed witches provided the proof and the new targets that the authorities so desperately sought. A quirky, or rather, diabolically clever aspect of this pressure to confess was the theological catch-22 it created for the devout Puritan. To falsely confess to witchcraft was to commit a grievous sin, to lie before God and man, potentially damning your eternal soul. Yet, to maintain your innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence and certain execution might be seen as stubborn pride, a refusal to acknowledge God's judgment as manifested through the afflictions of the girls and the wisdom of the magistrates. You, trapped in this impossible dilemma, wrestle with your conscience, your faith, and your primal instinct for survival. The promise of life, even a miserable life in prison, is a powerful lure when the alternative is the gallows. And as the pressure mounts, as your spirit weakens, the temptation to utter the words they want to hear, to simply make it all stop, becomes almost unbearable. While psychological pressure and the threat of execution were powerful tools for extracting confessions, sometimes a more direct, physical form of examination was employed in Salem to find tangible proof of your alleged pact with the devil, the search for the witch's mark or witch's teeth. Rooted in European witchcraft beliefs, it was commonly thought that witches bore a special mark on their bodies, where their animal familiars, imps or demons in animal form, would suckle, or where the devil himself had branded them upon sealing their covenant. The discovery of any unusual mole, wart, blemish, or even an insensitive spot on the accused's body could be interpreted as such a mark, providing seemingly irrefutable physical evidence of their guilt. This led to humiliating and often painful physical examinations of the accused, primarily women, but sometimes men as well. Imagine being stripped of your clothing, perhaps in a cold, drafty room, before a panel of examiners, often a group of respectable matrons from the community, or sometimes a male witch pricker, or even a physician. Your body is scrutinized from head to toe, every inch of your skin searched for any abnormality. Moles you've had your entire life, birthmarks, old scars, even insect bites, are suddenly viewed with suspicion, potential evidence of your demonic allegiance. The examiners might poke and prod these marks with pins or needles, looking for spots that are insensitive to pain, a supposed sign of a witch's teeth, or that do not bleed, another supposed demonic indicator. This process is not only physically uncomfortable, but profoundly humiliating, a violation of your personal dignity and privacy. There is no concept of medical ethics or patient consent as we understand it. You are property of the court, your body a text to be deciphered for signs of evil. The science behind identifying witches' marks was, of course, entirely specious, based on superstition and a pre-existing assumption of guilt. Any unusual skin feature could be, and often was, interpreted as damning evidence, especially if the accused was already unpopular or fit the stereotype of a witch, e.g., an old, cantankerous woman. The examiners were not objective. They were looking for confirmation of what they already believed. This practice of searching for witches' marks was widespread in European witch hunts and was imported to New England by the Puritan settlers. Historians of witchcraft trials note the gendered nature of these examinations, as women's bodies were often seen as more susceptible to demonic influence and more likely to bear such marks. The intimate and invasive nature of these searches was a powerful tool of intimidation and social control. A quirky, or rather tragically absurd, detail is that if an accused person flinched or cried out in pain when pricked, it might be taken as evidence of guilt, the devil protecting his mark. And if they didn't react, perhaps due to stoicism, shock, or a genuinely insensitive spot, that too could be seen as proof of a demonic mark. It was a no-win situation. You, enduring this degrading scrutiny, feel not only the physical discomfort, but also the crushing weight of a system designed to find you guilty, regardless of the truth. Your own body, something you once considered familiar and private, is now being twisted into evidence against you. Every freckle, every blemish a potential sign of your damnation. It's another layer of the waking nightmare, where the most intimate parts of your being are turned into public spectacles of supposed demonic collusion. Following your arrest and preliminary examinations, you are cast into the squalor and despair of a 17th century colonial jail, likely the Salem jail itself, or perhaps one in nearby Boston or Ipswich, if Salem's became too overcrowded. The conditions in these early American jails were horrific by any standard. Dark, freezing in winter, sweltering in summer, unhygienic, massively overcrowded with accused witches, men, women, and even children, and offering little in the way of sustenance or basic human dignity. This imprisonment itself was a form of torture, designed to break the spirit, and often the body, of the accused long before any formal trial. Imagine being thrust into a cramped, filthy cell, perhaps a damp stone dungeon or a crudely built wooden enclosure. The only light might come from a tiny, barred window, or not at all. The floor is likely cold, packed earth or rough stone, covered in straw that is teeming with lice, fleas, and other vermin. The stench is overwhelming, a putrid mix of unwashed bodies, human waste, as chamber pots, if provided, are infrequently emptied, stale food, vomit, and the ever-present odor of sickness and despair. You are packed in with numerous other prisoners, many of them also accused of witchcraft, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with fear and hopelessness. Some might be moaning in pain from illness or previous interrogations. Others might be muttering prayers or perhaps driven mad by their confinement. uttering incoherent cries. There is no privacy, no respite from the noise, the smell, the constant presence of human misery. Food, when it arrives, is meager and of appalling quality. Perhaps a hunk of stale, moldy bread, a thin, watery gruel, or a few scraps of salted meat. Water is often brackish and unsafe. Malnutrition and dehydration are rampant, weakening your body and making you more susceptible to the diseases that thrive in these unsanitary conditions. Typhus, often called jail fever, dysentery, smallpox. There is no medical care. If you fall ill, you are left to suffer or die among your fellow prisoners. Historians and archaeologists studying colonial-era jails emphasize the high mortality rates within these institutions, where prisoners often succumbed to disease or neglect before they even reached trial. The very act of surviving imprisonment was a testament to a strong constitution or sheer luck. Adding to the misery, prisoners in this era were often required to pay for their own keep, their food, bedding, if any, and even the jailer's fees and the cost of their chains. If you or your family had no money, your conditions would be even more dire. You might be literally left to starve, or to rely on the charity of fellow prisoners or sympathetic outsiders, if any dared to offer aid to a suspected witch. The practice of charging prisoners for their own incarceration was a cruel feature of early penal systems, further punishing the poor and the accused. A quirky, or rather profoundly depressing aspect of your confinement is the sheer, unadulterated boredom and despair that can set in. Day after day, week after week, you languish in this fetid darkness, with nothing to do but contemplate your grim fate, listen to the suffering of others, and fight off the encroaching sickness and madness. You, a modern man accustomed to a certain level of comfort, hygiene, and personal space, would find these conditions almost beyond human endurance. The filth, the hunger, the disease, the constant proximity to death and despair. It would be a relentless assault on your physical and mental well-being. A living hell designed to break you long before you ever faced a judge and jury. As you languish in the hellish conditions of the Salem jail, another, more insidious form of torment begins to eat away at your spirit. The crushing weight of social ostracism and the abandonment by your own community. In the tight-knit, religiously devout, and fear-gripped society of 1692, Salem, an accusation of witchcraft didn't just mean legal jeopardy. It meant an immediate and often irreversible social death, with neighbors, friends, and sometimes even family members turning away in fear, suspicion, or self-preservation. The bonds of community, once a source of strength and support, now become instruments of your isolation and condemnation. Imagine the faces you once knew, faces that greeted you with warmth and respect at the meeting house or in the village square, now contorted with fear or cold disdain when your name is mentioned. Friends you shared meals with, neighbors you helped raise a barn with, now cross the street to avoid your family members. They whisper behind cupped hands, their eyes darting towards your empty house as if it were a source of pestilence. The very people who once formed the fabric of your daily life now see you as an agent of Satan, a monstrous betrayer of God and community. This social shunning is a powerful and painful weapon, designed to reinforce the idea that you are no longer one of us, but one of them, the damned, the outcast. Even your own family is not immune to this pressure. Your spouse, your children, your siblings, They too become targets of suspicion and social stigma simply by association with you. They might be shunned at the market, their children tormented at school, if they are still allowed to attend. Their pews at the meeting house suddenly surrounded by empty spaces. The economic consequences can also be dire, as people refuse to trade with or employ members of an accused witch's family. The social and economic fallout for the families of accused witches in Salem was often devastating, leaving them impoverished, isolated, and struggling to survive even if their accused loved one was eventually acquitted, or if the hysteria subsided. The pressure on your family to denounce you, to distance themselves from your alleged evil, can be immense. Some family members, out of genuine fear, or perhaps a desperate attempt to save themselves, might even turn against you, offering testimony, however flimsy or coerced, that seems to confirm your guilt. This ultimate betrayal, by those you love and trust most, would be a soul-crushing blow. The Salem court records contain instances where family members testified against each other, a tragic consequence of the intense fear and pressure that permeated the community. A quirky, or rather, profoundly isolating aspect of this social outcasting is the way even nature itself might seem to confirm your guilt in the eyes of the superstitious. If a cow in the village falls ill after you are accused, or if a storm damages crops, some might whisper that it is further proof of your malevolent influence, your pact with the devil manifesting intangible harm to the community. You, a modern man who values social connection and the support of loved ones, would find this utter abandonment, this transformation from respected community member to reviled pariah, almost impossible to bear. The physical suffering of imprisonment is immense, but the psychological torment of being utterly alone, condemned and forsaken by your entire world, is a different, and perhaps even deeper, kind of hell, as you endure the horrors of imprisonment and social abandonment. A new and terrifying development adds to your despair. News begins to trickle in that other accused individuals, people you know, perhaps even friends or neighbors, are confessing to witchcraft, and in doing so are implicating still more members of the community, potentially including you. Again, the dynamic of coerced confessions leading to further accusations was a key engine driving the escalation of the Salem witch hunt, as those who confessed were often pressured to name their accomplices in demonic pacts, creating a snowball effect of fear and recrimination. This wasn't necessarily out of malice on the part of the confessors. Often, it was a desperate act of self-preservation, a way to escape immediate execution, or the result of intense psychological manipulation by the authorities. Imagine the jailer, or perhaps a visiting minister, informing you with grim satisfaction that good wife, another accused's name, a woman you've known for years, has finally seen the error of her ways, confessed to being a witch, and has named you as one of her fellow covenanters who danced with the devil in the woods. Or perhaps you overhear whispered conversations among other prisoners, tales of who has broken, who has named names, who has unburdened their soul, and in doing so, condemned others. Each such confession, whether true or false, adds another layer of seemingly irrefutable evidence against those who continued to maintain their innocence. If so-and-so, a respected, or perhaps just ordinary, member of the community, has admitted to witchcraft and pointed a finger at you, how can you possibly be innocent? The logic in the fevered atmosphere of Salem is inescapable for many. The pressure on those who confessed to provide names was immense. The magistrates and ministers were not just interested in individual repentance. They believed they were uncovering a vast demonic conspiracy, and they needed names to map out its extent. A confessor who was reluctant to implicate others might find their own hopes of leniency dimming. Historians analyzing the Salem confessions note the patterns of accusation, where confessors often named individuals who were already suspected, or those who were socially vulnerable, or sometimes, tragically, even their own family members, perhaps under duress or in a state of profound confusion and terror. This creates a horrifying dilemma for you. If you continue to maintain your innocence, you are now not only defying the spectral evidence of the afflicted girls, but also the direct testimony of confessed witches. Your position becomes even more untenable. The weight of accusation, now coming from multiple sources, becomes almost crushing. The strategy of using confessed witches as witnesses against others was a common and effective tactic in European witch trials as well, and it proved devastatingly successful in Salem in widening the net of accusation. A quirky, or rather diabolically cruel, aspect of this situation was that those who confessed and named others, while perhaps escaping immediate execution, often lived in a state of profound guilt, shame, and continued imprisonment, their lives ruined, their reputations shattered, forever marked as confessed witches, even if their confessions were coerced and false. You, witnessing this domino effect of accusation and confession from within your fetid jail cell, feel the walls closing in. The web of evidence, however flimsy and fabricated, is becoming tighter, more intricate, and seemingly inescapable. Your hope of ever clearing your name, of ever returning to a normal life, dwindles with each new confession that echoes through the grim corridors of Salem jail. If your case proceeds beyond the initial examinations, you may be subjected to another harrowing ordeal, a direct confrontation with your accusers, the afflicted girls, in a more formal, though still deeply biased setting. These confrontations, often staged during pre-trial hearings or even during the trials themselves, were designed not as an objective search for truth, but as a way to further demonstrate the supposed power of the accused witch over their victims, and to solidify the evidence of spectral torment in the minds of the magistrates and the public. For you, the accused, it is another exercise in futility and terror, a theatrical performance where your guilt is the predetermined conclusion. Imagine being brought from your squalid jail cell, weak and disheveled, back into the crowded meeting house or courthouse. You are placed before the magistrates, and facing you are the young women who have accused you. Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and others. They might appear pale, distressed, perhaps even genuinely convinced of their own afflictions. As soon as you enter their presence, or sometimes even just when your name is spoken, they might erupt into a fresh paroxysm of fits, screams, and contortions. He's here. His specter is upon me. He's pinching me, choking me. They cry, writhing on the floor, their eyes rolling back, their limbs flailing. The effect on the onlookers is electric, a seeming confirmation of your demonic power. The magistrates might then conduct a series of tests. You might be ordered to look at an afflicted girl. As your gaze falls upon her, she screams louder, her convulsions intensifying, proving that your evil eye is tormenting her. Then you might be ordered not to look at her, and her fits might momentarily subside, only to resume when your eyes inadvertently meet hers again. The touch test, which we've discussed, might be reenacted. You are forced to touch one of the girls while she is in the throes of a fit. Miraculously, or so it seems to the credulous, her fit ceases, proving that your malevolent influence has been drawn back into your own body. These staged confrontations and tests were powerful pieces of courtroom theater, deeply impressive to a 17th century audience steeped in beliefs about witchcraft and demonic power, and they served to overwhelm any rational defense the accused might offer. You might try to speak, to plead your innocence, to reason with the girls or the magistrates, but your words are often cut short by renewed screams and fits from your accusers. They might claim that your specter is whispering in their ears, telling them lies, or that the devil is preventing them from speaking the truth about your other supposed accomplices. The dynamic of these confrontations often placed the accused in an impossible position. Any action or inaction on their part could be, and often was, interpreted as further evidence of their guilt. A quirky, or rather deeply disturbing psychological aspect of these confrontations is the possibility that some of the afflicted girls, caught up in the momentum of the hysteria and the power they suddenly wielded, may have begun to genuinely believe their own performances, or at least become unable to distinguish between reality and their public role as victims. You, standing there, the target of this intense, highly emotional, and seemingly irrefutable performance of demonic affliction, feel a despair that chills you to the bone. It is like being trapped in a play where everyone else knows their lines, and your only role is that of the condemned villain, no matter what you say or do. The very air seems to crackle with a supernatural dread, and your own sanity feels as if it's hanging by a thread throughout your examinations, imprisonment, and any confrontations with your accusers. You desperately cling to the hope that reason, logic, and your lifetime of piety and good conduct will somehow prevail. You try to offer rational explanations, to point out inconsistencies in the accusations, to call upon your good character as attested by neighbors, if any still dare to speak for you. But in the witch-hunting frenzy of 1692, Salem, the power of superstition, fear, and the seemingly irrefutable evidence of spectral torment and coerced confessions often overwhelmed any attempts at a logical or fact-based defense, leaving the accused in a state of profound and terrifying helplessness. Your reason is no match for their righteous, terrified certainty. Imagine trying to explain to the magistrates that you were at home, in bed, with your spouse as a witness. At the very moment, the afflicted girls claim your specter was miles away, tormenting them or attending a witch's sabbath in the woods. Your alibi, however solid, is dismissed. After all, your physical body might have been at home, but your spectral body, your evil emanation, could travel anywhere to do the devil's work. How can you prove where your ghost wasn't? Or perhaps you point out that the witch's mark found on your body is simply an old mole you've had since childhood. This too is dismissed. The devil is cunning and can disguise his marks. You might argue that the afflicted girls have a known animosity towards your family due to some past land dispute or village squabble, suggesting a motive for false accusation. This is seen as a desperate attempt to deflect blame, or worse, an attack on the credibility of God's innocent sufferers. You might try to quote scripture to affirm your unwavering faith in God and your abhorrence of Satan, but even this can be turned against you. The devil, after all, is a master of disguise and can quote scripture for his own purposes. Your piety might be seen as a clever cloak for your hidden wickedness. The theological framework of Puritanism, with its intense focus on sin, salvation, and the active presence of Satan in the world, created an environment where it was often easier to believe in the reality of widespread witchcraft than to question the accusers or the process, especially when those accusers were seen to be suffering from inexplicable, seemingly supernatural torments. Any attempt to question the validity of spectral evidence, or to suggest that the afflicted girls might be mistaken, deluded, or even lying, is met with outrage. You are not just denying your own guilt. You are questioning the very work of God in exposing evil, and perhaps even siding with the devil against his afflicted children. The few brave individuals in Salem and surrounding communities who did dare to question the proceedings or defend the accused often found themselves under suspicion and, in some cases, accused of witchcraft themselves. This created a powerful chilling effect, silencing dissent and allowing the hysteria to proceed largely unchecked, at least in its early and most intense phases. A quirky, or rather, tragically ironic aspect of your predicament is that the more rationally and coherently you argue your innocence, the more some might see it as proof of your cunning and demonic intelligence. A true witch, they might reason, would be adept at deception and sophistry. You, a modern man who believes in due process, the presumption of innocence, and the importance of verifiable evidence, would find yourself trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare, a world where logic is inverted and reason is powerless against the tide of fear and superstition. Every word you speak in your own defense seems only to tighten the noose around your neck if, despite the overwhelming pressure to confess, you continue to maintain your innocence. Your case will eventually proceed to a formal trial before the specially convened Court of Oyer and Terminer to hear and determine, established in May 1692 to deal with the escalating witchcraft crisis, presided over by prominent magistrates and jurists, including Deputy Governor William Stoughton, a staunch believer in witchcraft and a strong proponent of spectral evidence. These trials were heavily weighted against the accused, with the outcome, for those who pleaded not guilty, being an almost foregone conclusion, a guilty verdict and a sentence of death by hanging. Your last, best hope for justice now rests in a system that seems designed to condemn you. Imagine being brought into the courtroom, likely the Salem meeting house again, but this time for your formal trial. The atmosphere is even more charged, more solemn, yet also filled with a grim, expectant energy. The judges, in their robes and wigs, sit in judgment. A jury of your peers, local men, all subject to the same fears and beliefs as the wider community, has been impaneled. The accusers, the afflicted girls, are present, ready to repeat their spectral testimonies and perhaps enact their torments anew for the benefit of the jury. You are allowed no defense counsel in the modern sense. You must speak for yourself, cross-examine witnesses if you even dare or know how, and try to refute the mountain of evidence piled against you. But what defense can you offer against ghosts only others can see, or against the coerced confessions of those who have already been broken? The trial proceeds with a grim predictability. The afflicted girls give their dramatic testimonies. Confessed witches might be brought in to further implicate you. Witnesses might speak of past misfortunes or strange occurrences in your neighborhood that are now, with hindsight, attributed to your malevolent witchcraft. A cow that died mysteriously, a batch of butter that wouldn't churn, a child who fell ill after you looked at them askance. Hearsay, rumor, and old grudges are all admissible as evidence of your long-standing compact with the devil. Legal scholars analyzing the Salem trials consistently point to the numerous procedural irregularities, the lack of basic legal protections for the accused, the admission of highly prejudicial and unverifiable evidence, especially spectral evidence, and the strong bias of the judges, particularly Stoughton, as factors that made a fair trial virtually impossible. You might try to call character witnesses, people who will speak to your piety and good standing in the community. But many are now too afraid to associate themselves with an accused witch. Those who do testify on your behalf might find their own credibility attacked, or even find themselves under suspicion. The judges frequently interrupt your attempts to speak, admonishing you for your supposed obstinacy or deceit. The sheer weight of accusation, the emotional power of the afflicted girl's performances, and the prevailing belief in your guilt create an almost insurmountable barrier. The pressure on the jury to convict was also immense, coming from the judges, the ministers, and the community at large, who were desperate to see the witches rooted out and punished, believing it was the only way to end the demonic afflictions and restore God's favor. A quirky, or rather chillingly revealing, aspect of the Salem trials was the speed with which many of them were conducted and verdicts reached. Justice was swift, and almost invariably it was deadly for those who maintained their innocence. As the trial draws to a close, and the jury retires to deliberate, often for a surprisingly short time, a cold dread settles in your heart. You know, with a terrible certainty, what their verdict will be, and when they return, and the foreman utters that single, devastating word, guilty, your last flicker of earthly hope is extinguished. The judge then pronounces the sentence. You are to be taken from this place to the place of execution, and there be hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy on your soul, a mercy you were denied by man. A particularly insidious and effective tactic used by the prosecutors in the Salem witch trials was the introduction of testimony from confessed witches, individuals who, under duress or in a state of confusion and terror, had admitted to witchcraft and were now pressured to implicate others, including you. The testimony of these confessed witches, who often described elaborate and entirely fantastical witches' sabbaths, demonic pacts, and spectral assaults perpetrated by themselves and their supposed accomplices, was given enormous weight by the court and jury, as it seemed to provide insider confirmation of the vast demonic conspiracy believed to be afflicting Salem. For you, who have steadfastly maintained your innocence, being named by someone who has broken and confessed is a devastating blow, making your denials seem even more like stubborn deceit. Imagine sitting in the courtroom, listening in horror as a former neighbor, perhaps even a friend or a distant relative, someone you know to be as innocent as yourself, stands before the court and, with a voice hollow with shame or fear, recounts a litany of supposed demonic activities they engaged in with you. They might describe how you flew together on a broomstick or a pole, or even just a pig, to a midnight rendezvous in the woods, how you signed the devil's book in your own blood, how you plotted to torment the afflicted girls, or how you participated in a blasphemous black mass, renouncing your baptism and pledging allegiance to Satan. These are not vague accusations. They are often filled with lurid, specific details, a testament to the power of suggestion, fear, and the desperate human need to say something, anything, to appease the relentless interrogators. The magistrates and ministers would listen to these confessions with rapt attention, often prompting the confessor with leading questions to elicit more names and more details. Who else was at this witches' meeting? Did you see Goodman, your name there? What evil acts did he perform? The confessor, often in a state of extreme psychological distress, eager to demonstrate their repentance and cooperation in hopes of leniency, might readily supply the answers demanded of them. Historians who have studied the Salem confessions emphasize the formulaic nature of many of them, suggesting that the confessors were often echoing the themes and details that their interrogators wanted to hear, or that were already circulating in the community's fevered imagination. This testimony is incredibly damaging to your defense. How can you argue against someone who claims to have been your partner in witchcraft? Their confession seems to validate the spectral evidence of the afflicted girls, creating a seemingly unbreakable web of proof. The tragic irony is that many of those who confessed did so in a desperate attempt to save their own lives. As confessed witches who cooperated by naming others were generally not executed, though they remained imprisoned and reviled. This created a perverse incentive to lie and to implicate innocent people. A quirky, or rather heartbreakingly human detail might be the visible anguish or reluctance of some of these confessors as they testify against people they know to be innocent. You might see the flicker of shame in their eyes, the tremor in their voice, even as they utter the damning words. But they are trapped, just as you are, in a system that rewards falsehood and punishes truth. You, listening to these fantastical tales of your supposed demonic exploits, woven from fear and desperation, feel a new level of despair. It is one thing to be accused by hysterical girls. It is another, far more bitter thing to be condemned by the coerced lies of those who were once your peers, now forced to become instruments of your destruction. As you stand accused, facing a barrage of spectral evidence, coerced confessions, and the unyielding conviction of the magistrates, you look around the crowded meeting house, searching for a friendly face, a voice of reason, someone who will dare to speak out against the madness. But what you often find is a chilling, pervasive silence from those who might, in their hearts, harbor doubts or believe in your innocence. The atmosphere of fear and intimidation in 1692, Salem was so intense that many individuals who questioned the validity of the accusations or the fairness of the proceedings were too afraid to speak publicly, lest they too be accused of witchcraft or of siding with the devil. This silence of the sensible was a crucial factor that allowed the hysteria to escalate and consume so many innocent lives. Imagine knowing that there are people in the community, perhaps respected elders, educated men, even some ministers from neighboring towns who had expressed private concerns about the reliance on spectral evidence, who could potentially cast doubt on the proceedings. Yet they remain largely silent. They see the injustice, they hear the inconsistencies, but the personal risk of challenging the dominant narrative, of questioning the afflicted girls, or the powerful magistrates like William Stoughton, is simply too great. To do so would be to invite suspicion upon themselves, to be labeled a sympathizer with witches, or worse, a witch oneself. Several individuals who did dare to sign petitions or offer testimony in defense of the accused later found themselves targeted by new accusations. The message was clear. Conform conformity and silence were the safest paths. This fear was not unfounded. The belief in witchcraft was deeply ingrained, and the sense that Salem was under a direct demonic assault was very real for many. Anyone who seemed to be hindering the efforts to root out this evil could be seen as an impediment to God's work, or even as an agent of Satan actively trying to protect his minions. Historians often point to the power of communal fear and social pressure in silencing dissent during periods of mass hysteria, whether it be witch hunts, political purges, or other forms of collective delusion. It takes extraordinary courage to stand against the tide when the entire community seems convinced of a particular narrative, especially when that narrative is backed by religious and legal authority. A quirky, or rather tragically revealing, aspect of this silence might be the way even private conversations become guarded. You might sense that some people pity you, or believe you are innocent, but they will only express these sentiments in the most hushed tones, in the most private of settings. If at all, publicly, they must conform, or at least appear to conform, to the prevailing hysteria. You, standing alone and accused, feel the weight not only of the accusations against you, but also of this deafening silence from those who might have helped. It is a profound betrayal, not necessarily of malice, but of fear. The knowledge that reason and truth are being sacrificed on the altar of communal panic, and that those who know better are too cowed to speak, adds another layer of despair to your already hopeless situation. It's a stark reminder that the greatest evils often flourish, not just because of the actions of the wicked, but because of the inaction of the good, or at least the silent. The guilty verdict has been delivered. The sentence of death by hanging has been pronounced. Your earthly hopes are extinguished. Now, you are returned to the squalor of Salem jail, not as an accused awaiting trial, but as a condemned soul awaiting execution. The period between sentencing and execution in the Salem witch trials was often agonizingly short, sometimes only a matter of days or a week or two, leaving little time for appeals, which were largely futile anyway, or for any real psychological or spiritual preparation for death, beyond what your own faith or fortitude could muster in the face of unimaginable terror and injustice. This was not a time for quiet reflection and making peace. It was a grim, terrifying countdown. Imagine yourself back in that fetid cell, the finality of the sentence pressing down on you with an almost physical weight. The other prisoners, some still awaiting trial, others perhaps already condemned like you, might look at you with a mixture of pity, fear, and perhaps a dawning recognition of their own likely fate. There is no special treatment for the condemned, no improvement in your appalling living conditions. You still endure the hunger, the filth, the cold, but now with the added torment of knowing your precise and imminent end. Sleep, if it comes at all, is likely filled with nightmares of the gallows, of the jeering crowd, of the final suffocating drop. During your waking hours, your mind might race, replaying the trial, the accusations, searching desperately for some flaw, some missed opportunity, some way out, even though you know deep down that there is none. Ministers like Samuel Parris or Nicholas Noyes might visit you, not necessarily to offer comfort or question the verdict, but to make one last desperate attempt to extract a confession. Even now, with your death ordained, they still seek your admission of guilt, perhaps to further validate the trials in the eyes of a driven, uneasy public, or out of a genuine, if misguided, concern for the salvation of your eternal soul. Confess, Goodman, your name, they might plead, and unburden yourself before you meet your Maker. Name your confederates, and perhaps God will yet have mercy on you. But for you, who have maintained your innocence through it all, what is the point of lying now, on the very precipice of death? To confess falsely would be to betray your own conscience, your own faith, and to die with a lie on your lips. For many of the Salem condemned, their refusal to confess, even in the face of certain execution, was their final, powerful act of defiance and integrity. The steadfastness of many of the Salem accused in maintaining their innocence, even unto death, is a remarkable testament to their courage and conviction in the face of overwhelming pressure and injustice. A quirky, or rather, heartbreakingly human concern during these last days might be for your family. What will become of them after you're gone? Your property will likely be confiscated by the authorities, a common practice with the convicted witches, further impoverishing their families. Your spouse and children will bear the stigma of your execution for years to come. You might try to send them a final message, a letter, if you can write and find someone to carry it, offering words of love, comfort, and a plea for them to remember your innocence. You, a modern man, would be desperate for legal counsel, for an appeal, for some intervention. But in 1692, Salem, the wheels of justice, once set in motion against an accused witch, were almost impossible to stop. Your only preparation now is to meet your end with as much dignity and courage as you can summon, clinging to your innocence as your last and only earthly possession. The dreaded day arrives. It is the day of your execution. Along with other condemned witches, you are taken from the fetid confines of Salem jail to begin your final public journey to the place of execution, typically Gallows Hill, a barren rise of land just outside Salem town. This procession of the condemned through the streets was a grim public spectacle, designed to serve as a warning to others and to reinforce the community's sense of triumph over the supposed forces of evil, though it was also an occasion for the condemned to endure further humiliation and abuse from a hostile or fearful crowd. For you, it is the ultimate walk of shame, a horrifying prelude to an unjust death. Imagine being led out of the jail, perhaps in chains, blinking in the unaccustomed daylight. Your body is weak from imprisonment, your spirit battered, but you try to hold your head high, to meet your fate with some semblance of dignity. A cart, a crude wooden tumbril, might be waiting to transport those too weak to walk, or you might be forced to make the journey on foot, stumbling over the rough, uneven ground. A crowd has gathered. Some are silent, their faces grim or perhaps tinged with pity, but many are not. You hear cheers, curses, shouts of, "Witch, devil's spawn, may you burn in hell." People point, they mock, they might even throw stones or refuse at you and your fellow condemned. The afflicted girls might be present, perhaps even leading the chorus of condemnation. Their earlier performances now reaching a fever pitch of righteous hysteria. The journey to Gallows Hill is not long in distance, but it feels like an eternity. Every step is an agony, not just physical, but emotional. You see faces in the crowd, people you once knew, neighbors, fellow churchgoers, now looking at you with hatred or fear. You might search for a friendly face, a sign of sympathy, but find none, or only a few who dare not make their feelings known. The ministers might walk alongside the condemned, still exhorting them to confess, to save their souls even at this last hour. But their words are likely lost in the din of the crowd and the turmoil in your own heart. The public nature of executions in this era was a key part of their function as a tool of social control and a reinforcement of authority, both secular and religious. This was not a private affair. It was a community ritual of purgation. A quirky, or rather deeply unsettling aspect of these processions was the almost festive, carnivalesque atmosphere that could sometimes accompany them, particularly among certain segments of the crowd who viewed the execution of witches as a form of grim entertainment or a righteous victory over evil. You, a modern man, would be horrified by this public display of cruelty and mob mentality. The lack of compassion, the gleeful anticipation of your death, the way your suffering is turned into a public spectacle. It would be an almost unbearable assault on your human dignity. As Gallows Hill comes into view, with its stark, waiting gallows, a cold dread, more profound than any you have yet experienced, settles upon you. This is it, the end of your earthly journey, played out before a jeering, unforgiving audience. You have reached Gallows Hill. The crowd presses in, held back by constables. The gallows, a crude wooden structure, stands stark against the sky, a symbol of final, brutal judgment. One by one, you and your fellow condemned are brought forward. Before the noose is placed around your neck, you are typically given an opportunity to speak your last words, a final chance to address the crowd, to confess your alleged sins, or to maintain your innocence before God and man. For many of the Salem accused who went to their deaths protesting their innocence, these last words were a powerful, poignant, and often courageous act of defiance. Imagine standing on the cart beneath the gallows, or on a small platform, the hangman, a grim, hooded figure, waiting nearby. The eyes of the entire community are upon you. The ministers might make one last plea for a confession. Goodman, your name, one might intone. It is not too late to unburden your soul. Confess your compact with the devil, and though your earthly life is forfeit, you may yet find mercy in the hereafter. What do you say? Do you, in this final moment, broken by months of suffering and facing certain death, finally give them the confession they so desperately crave? Perhaps in a misguided hope of easing your passage, or sparing your family further recrimination? Or do you hold fast to your truth, to your innocence, even though you know it will seal your doom? Many of the historical accounts of the Salem executions detail the remarkable courage and steadfastness of those who maintained their innocence to the very end. George Burroughs, a former minister himself, recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly from the gallows, an act a witch was supposedly incapable of doing, moving many in the crowd to doubt his guilt, much to the consternation of ministers like Cotton Mather, who quickly reassured the onlookers that the devil could also appear as an angel of light. Rebecca Nurse, an elderly and respected church member, went to her death with quiet dignity, her innocence attested to by many, but ultimately unheeded by the court. John Proctor, a man of strong opinions who had openly doubted the afflicted girls, vehemently protested his innocence and condemned the proceedings. The final speeches of the Salem condemned, as recorded or remembered, offer a heartbreaking glimpse into their suffering, their faith, and their often unwavering commitment to truth in the face of overwhelming injustice. A quirky, or rather profoundly moving detail is that some of the condemned used their last words not to plead for their own lives, but to forgive their accusers, or to pray for the community that had condemned them. This act of grace, in the face of such cruelty, speaks volumes about their character. You, standing there, the rough hemp of the noose perhaps already grazing your neck, feel a surge of emotion. Fear, yes, but also perhaps a strange clarity, a sense of release from the earthly torments you have endured. You speak your truth, whether it is a final, defiant assertion of your innocence, a prayer for forgiveness for your true sins, but not for witchcraft, or a plea for God's mercy on a deluded and misguided community. Your voice, though perhaps weak, carries across the silent, watching crowd. These are your last words, your final testament, before the terrible, swift finality of the drop. Your last words spoken, your final prayers uttered, the moment you have dreaded, perhaps even longed for, as an end to suffering, is upon you. The hangman, his face hidden or impassive, adjusts the noose around your neck. The rope is coarse, biting into your skin. He checks the knot. The crowd falls into a hushed, expectant silence. This is the culmination of months of fear, accusation, interrogation, imprisonment, and a sham trial. Death by hanging in the 17th century was a brutal, public, and often inefficient method of execution, intended not just to end a life, but to serve as a terrifying spectacle and a deterrent to others. For you, the condemned, it is the final, irreversible act of injustice. Imagine standing on the precarious platform or the back of the cart, your hands likely bound behind you. You can feel the slight sway of the gallows structure in the wind. You might look out at the crowd one last time, searching for a friendly or sympathetic face, or perhaps just seeing a blur of undifferentiated humanity. You might close your eyes, trying to focus on a prayer, a memory of a loved one, or simply steeling yourself for the inevitable. The minister might be intoning a final prayer or a passage from Scripture, his voice a distant drone. The hangman receives his signal. There is a sudden, jarring movement as the cart is pulled away from under your feet, or a trapdoor springs open, and then you are falling. A sickening lurch, followed by a violent, constricting pressure around your neck as the rope snaps taut. If the drop is insufficient, or the knot improperly placed, death is not instantaneous. It can be a slow, agonizing strangulation, your body convulsing, gasping for air, your vision blurring, a roaring in your ears. The crowd watches, some in horrified silence, others perhaps with a grim satisfaction, or even a morbid fascination. This is the justice of Salem. This is the fate of those deemed to have covenanted with the devil. Historical accounts of hangings often describe the gruesome details of death by strangulation versus a quicker death by cervical dislocation, breaking of the neck, the latter being more humane, but not always achieved, especially with the crude methods of the time. Even in death, your body might be subjected to further indignities. The corpses of executed witches were often denied a proper Christian burial in consecrated ground. They might be cut down and unceremoniously dumped into a shallow, common grave, perhaps in a crevice on Gallows Hill itself, their final resting place as ignominious as their trial. There would be no gravestone, no eulogy, only the lingering stigma for your surviving family. The treatment of the bodies of the Salem witches reflected the community's desire to utterly eradicate their perceived evil and to serve as a stark warning to any others who might stray from the path of righteousness. A quirky, or rather profoundly somber thought might be that for you, this violent public end is, in a twisted way, a release, an escape from the physical torment of imprisonment, from the psychological torture of accusation and condemnation, from the unbearable weight of injustice. Your suffering on this earth is finally over, but the questions, the shame, and the dark stain of Salem would linger for generations. You, a modern man, witnessing this brutal finality, would be overwhelmed by a sense of profound sorrow and outrage. The waste of innocent lives, the triumph of fear over reason, the terrible power of mass hysteria. It is a chilling lesson from the past. And as your imagined life ebbs away on that lonely hill, you are left only with the silence and the wind whistling through the empty noose. Your unjust death on Gallows Hill, along with 19 others hanged, and several more who died in prison during the Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693, does not immediately bring an end to the madness, but it does plant the seeds of doubt and remorse that will eventually, slowly, lead to a reckoning. The legacy of the Salem witch trials is a complex and enduring one, a dark chapter in American history that serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of religious extremism, mass hysteria, scapegoating, flawed legal processes, and the tragic consequences when fear and superstition overwhelm reason and justice. For you, the innocent victim, your legacy is one of suffering and wrongful condemnation, but also, ultimately, a catalyst for change and a symbol of the importance of defending truth and due process. In the immediate aftermath, the trials continued for a time, but the tide began to turn. Doubts about the reliability of spectral evidence grew, even among some of the magistrates and ministers who had initially championed it. The accusations began to reach too high, targeting well-respected individuals, even the wife of Governor Phipps. This, perhaps more than anything, signaled that the hysteria had gone too far and threatened to consume the entire social order. Governor Phipps eventually intervened, dissolving the Court of Oyer and Terminer and prohibiting further arrests based solely on spectral evidence. The remaining accused were gradually released or tried under stricter rules of evidence, leading to acquittals. The Salem nightmare, after more than a year of terror, was finally drawing to a close, but the scars remained. The community was deeply divided, families shattered, reputations ruined, and innocent lives lost. In the years that followed, there was a slow, painful process of reflection and attempts at reconciliation. Some of the principal accusers, like Ann Putnam Jr., later publicly apologized for their role in the trials, claiming to have been deluded by Satan. In 1711, the Massachusetts colony officially annulled the convictions of many of those found guilty and offered financial restitution to their families, though no amount of money could truly compensate for the suffering and loss inflicted. Historians and sociologists have extensively analyzed the causes and consequences of the Salem witch trials, viewing them as a classic case study of how social, economic, religious, and psychological factors can combine to create a devastating witch hunt. A quirky, or rather historically significant detail, is that Judge Samuel Sewall, one of the primary Salem trial judges, later publicly confessed his error and guilt, asking for forgiveness from God and the community for his role in condemning innocent people. This public act of repentance was rare and remarkable for its time. You, a modern man, looking back at this event, would clearly see the timeless lesson lessons about the dangers of abandoning critical thinking, the importance of protecting civil liberties, and the constant need to guard against the rise of fear and intolerance in any society. Your story, and the stories of the others who suffered in Salem, is not just a historical tragedy. It is a potent reminder, a warning that echoes through the centuries. And perhaps in that remembrance, there is a form of belated justice, an acknowledgement that truth, however trampled, will eventually find its voice. The screams from the court, the chill of the Salem jail, and the dark shadow of the gallows now fade, giving way to the quiet and safety of your own space. The horror of false accusation, the helplessness before spectral evidence, and the utter despair of facing a fanatical legal system. All those burdens can now be laid down. You have walked with an innocent soul through one of history's darkest chapters, and you have borne witness to their suffering. Let their final release, even in an unjust death, become an invitation for your own deep relaxation. The tension of the story can dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace in knowing that the nightmare ended and its bitter lessons were recorded. There are no more accusations, no more unjust trials, no more fear of the unseen. There is only the stillness of the night, the softness of your bed, and the gratitude that you live in a time when reason and justice, though not always perfect, are more highly prized. Let the reflections on Salem settle and allow your mind to rest. Sleep awaits, a sweet and peaceful release.